Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. Many questions remain regarding the sudden disappearance and replacement of PRC Foreign Minister Qin Gang earlier this year. What did he do? Where is he now? What have the implications for Beijing elite politics been? We may not get definitive answers to these questions, but that has not stopped many from investigating or speculating on them to varying degrees of quality and sophistication. We start today's video by noting a widely circulated US-based Wall Street Journal article which argues that it knows what events led up to Qin's fall from grace. Of course, we cannot be certain how accurate these reports are. As we will see, they cover events which we have previously accepted as possibilities. For our purposes now, we note the main points made in the article. The Wall Street Journal reports, citing what it calls highly authoritative unnamed sources, that it has indeed confirmed that former Foreign Minister Qin Gang was removed due to an affair and the resulting US passport-holding baby while he was ambassador to the United States. I'm now quoting the report directly. Senior Chinese officials, including ministers and provincial leaders, were briefed last month on the party's investigation into Qin, who served as the Chinese ambassador to the US from July 2021 until January this year. The senior officials were told the formal reason for Qin's dismissal was lifestyle issues, a common party euphemism for sexual misconduct, according to the people. The officials were further told that the probe found that Qin had engaged in an extramarital affair that led to the birth of a child in the US, two of the people said. The investigation is continuing with Qin's cooperation, the people added, and it is now focusing on whether the affair or other conduct by Qin might have compromised China's national security. The report continues. In Qin's case, the affair disclosed by the party's investigation triggered his downfall partly because Qin's US-born child could potentially compromise his ability to represent China's interests in dealing with the Americans. We end our direct quoting of the report here. We remember that various versions of the story were the most popular speculations made around the time of Qin's initial disappearance. Quote, "I've heard his mistress had an apartment near the ambassador's residence and that he was a regular visitor, which raises a whole set of questions if that is true. Did the FBI know? And did they gather photographic, video, audio evidence of the affair? How many staff members at the PRC embassy knew but did not report the discipline violations? What happens to those who knew and either did nothing or helped Qin? Qin spent about a decade in the UK. Did he do something similar there? Qin is a Central Committee member, so we may hear more about this case publicly before the third plenum that should convene by the end of the year, if he is to be removed as a Central Committee member at that plenum." End quote. Next up, we move to the economy. Yesterday saw the publication of another excellent report on China's local fiscal and debt issues. However, since we did a deep dive into this topic yesterday, I will spare viewers 2 days in a row discussing my pet topic. I do believe the local fiscal and debt situation is the most important economic story in China, more consequential than, and indeed closely interconnected to, China's housing crisis. But like I said, I will spare you 2 days in a row of this relatively dry topic, so we will return to it later in the week. For the Chinese economy today, however, we examine 2 reports from arguably the most important foreign business lobbying organizations in China, the US and the EU Chambers of Commerce. And the findings of these reports are quite disquieting. According to the AmCham Shanghai Report on Business Climate in China, published yesterday, Tuesday, only 52% of companies expect greater revenue in 2023 than in 2022. And we remember that the country was going through zero COVID for much of 2022. 68% of respondents reported profits in 2022, compared with 75% in 2021. Over the next 3 to 5 years, 40% of respondents expect revenue growth in China to outpace their company's worldwide growth, a 7% drop versus last year. Only 52%, a little over half, of the 325 respondents said they were optimistic about their 5-year business outlook in China, falling 3 percentage points from last year to the lowest level in the survey's 25-year history. While sectors such as pharmaceuticals, legal services, and retail reported slightly higher levels of optimism, they were lower in logistics, technology, and management consulting, quote, because of factors such as China's crackdown on due diligence firms, end quote. The report said, quote, 2023 was supposed to be the year investor confidence and optimism bounced back after years of COVID disruptions and restrictions, end quote, before admitting that this has not been the case for their respondents. 31% of respondents are increasing investment in China, with the top reason being China's market growth potential. 22% of respondents are decreasing investment in China this year compared to 2022, with the top reason being uncertainty about the US-China trade relationship, followed by expectations of slower growth in China. 40% of respondents are redirecting or planning to redirect investment originally planned for China, a 6 percentage point uptick versus last year, with most looking towards Southeast Asia, according to the report. And 19% of respondents are considering moving some of their current operations out of China over the next 1 to 3 years, quote, largely due to uncertainty about US-China relations, end quote. 1/3 of respondents reported that policies and regulations towards foreign companies had worsened in the past year, while 2/3 of companies, quote, face pressure to decouple. Most point the finger at US government policy rather than Chinese government policy, end quote. Shortly after the publication of the AmCham Shanghai report, the European Union Chamber of Commerce released its own European Business in China position paper, which outlined many of the similar issues discussed above, noting that European companies are, quote, struggling with competing requests from Chinese and Western consumers to produce goods containing no Chinese or US-made components or software, end quote, with the complaints mainly critical of the Chinese side of the equation. More than 1,000 individual recommendations were made by the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China in this annual position paper, including, quote, tangible steps from Beijing to cultivate a transparent, consistent, and predictable regulatory environment, end quote. Adding, quote, at the top of a growing list of questions about the Chinese market is, what kind of relationship does China want to have with foreign enterprises, end quote. Next up, Huawei's political fallout. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. It's a huge help for the channel. Liking, sharing with people who you think would like this sort of content, and subscribing. 50% of regular viewers are not subscribed. These are all great ways to help the channel grow. And for anyone who can go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable and primarily subscriber supported, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, on yesterday, US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo testified at a congressional hearing, which included brief comments on Huawei's new Mate 60 Pro 5G phone. We remember that the new Huawei smartphones, released while the Commerce Secretary was in Beijing for an official visit, caused some uproar and shock in Washington, raising questions surrounding how advanced Chinese chip-making is and whether US sanctions are an effective tool. US Commerce Secretary Raimondo said she was, quote, upset, end quote, when Huawei released its phone during her visit, but that the US has, quote, no evidence China can make those components at scale, end quote, referring to the apparently advanced chips within the phones. However, a recent report by Haitong International Securities Analysts estimates that Huawei is planning to build 15 million smartphones powered by these new chips in 2023, and 70 million in 2024. If true, that would indeed suggest the components can be made at scale. Many of these would be mid-range 5G phones to be launched as soon as October. Raimondo added at the hearing, quote, we're trying to use every single tool at our disposal to deny the Chinese the ability to advance their technology in ways that can hurt us, end quote. With its export controls last year, the Biden administration tried to draw a line at preventing China from getting access to 14-nanometer chips, or about 8 years behind the most advanced technology. However, teardowns of the new Huawei Mate 60 Pro phone reveals new chips that were fabricated in China by SMIC, the first to utilize SMIC's most advanced 7-nanometer technology. Meanwhile, also on Tuesday, UK-based Reuters writes that lawmaker and chair of the US House Committee on China, Gallagher, plans to meet with a semiconductor industry group to express concerns over US investments in China's chip industry, and that he believes the US rules enacted last October that cut off the sales of advanced artificial intelligence chips to China should be tightened to cover less advanced chips. The unnamed source speaking to the outlet added that Gallagher also aimed to talk with the group about reducing the number of semiconductor manufacturing machines that could be sent to China. And while we're on this topic, it seems that market fears that government bans and strong Huawei competition may greatly hurt Apple's performance in China may have been premature, or at the very least somewhat exaggerated. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes this week that Apple's new iPhone 15 series has been warmly received in China, quote, with consumers rushing to snap up the latest iteration of the US tech giant's iconic handset via a variety of sales channels, end quote. We will need to wait for official sales numbers before we can come to one conclusion or another, however. And one final update to cover today. A newly published report from China's prestigious Peking University's National School of Development has concluded that policies meant to relieve academic pressure on students in primary and middle school have actually exacerbated inequality in the Chinese education system. The study showed that the chance of students from the bottom 10% on the household income scale entering high school decreased by 9.3 percentage points and increased by 5.3 percentage points for students from the top 10% from 2010 to 2018. There was also a widening gap in family investment in education and students' time spent studying. Among the bottom 10%, average expenditure on education fell by 21%, while children's weekly study time fell by an average of 9.19 hours. The report explained that this is all despite the so-called burden reduction policies in China's education sector rolled out over this period. Indeed, it may well be because of these policies that the inequality has worsened, with the report writing, quote, the price of the decline is that low-income families have a diminishing chance of gaining access to the competition for higher education. The past education model that did not rely on family education or financial resources is disappearing, end quote. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that these findings, quote, reveal that various government measures have made it harder for children from low-income families to get into high school, explaining that the central government has launched several measures aimed at reducing academic pressure on students since 2009, including limiting the frequency of exams and time spent on homework, requiring a minimum amount of sleep, and prohibiting classes set up to separate different levels of students. In 2021, the government also banned for-profit tutoring for core curriculum subjects, which devastated the industry, and we covered this at the time. However, this Peking University report finds that these policies, quote, did not result in significant reduction in terms of students' burden or money spent on education, end quote, arguing that the true problem is that as long as there is ferocious competition to get into a very limited number of good schools, the study load will remain excessive and wealthier families will have an advantage, and that the answer is creating more high-quality schools and training more good teachers while improving schools' resources. Indeed, a first-year economics student could tell you that when you have a huge demand chasing a very limited supply of resources, in this case millions of students, or parents of students, trying to get into a tiny number of high-quality schools and universities, then this situation cannot be fixed simply through government fiat, muting market signals. But if the answer is creating more high-quality high schools and training more competitively paid teachers, then the question arises, with so many poorer local regions facing acute fiscal pressures, how will they pay for this? And the answer is, they probably can't, which would suggest that this issue of intensifying inequality is likely only going to continue to worsen. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.